the scent of death mixed with time and fear. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Comment your city. I always read your words. Wolfe finds murder at home. I don't keep a diary, because a diary is a confession that you expect life to forget you. But I do have a file drawer that could put a district attorney out of work and a minister out of charity. I add to it when circumstances insist. Tuesday's circumstances walked into our front room a little past 11. A clear violation of the house rule that interruptions before lunch must be emergencies, subpoenas, or women who look like they've never been told no. This one qualified on 2 out of 3 and was aiming for the hat trick. She gave her name as Margot Allardyce and her coat to me, in that order. The coat was sable and tried to weigh as much as her confidence. She was the director of something called the Metropolitan Gastronomic Trust, which sounded like an organization that could get offended on behalf of a soufflé. She looked at the yellow walls, the books, the globe, the big chair that could hold a king, and then at the king who at that hour was in fact in residence. Nero Wolfe had returned from the plant rooms at 11 sharp, cross-breezed with the faint moisture of orchids and a temper that wasn't taking applicants. He eased himself into the one piece of furniture in New York City that would have sued if anyone else sat in it, and aimed his brown eyes at our caller. "Madam," he said, which is Wolfen for "you may begin, but don't take liberties." Miss Allardyce chose her spot on the red leather chair that occupies a corner of the rug like a co-conspirator. She didn't sit so much as a light. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "I assure you I detest taking liberties. This is business." "Then you will state it," Wolfe said, "and we will both be happier sooner." I took my place at my desk with a notebook I would use if anything happened that was worth remembering. Fritz was in the kitchen, which is the same as saying the Treasury was in session. The house smelled like browned butter and thyme, a condition I recommend to anyone trying to remain civil in a city built like a fist. Miss Allardyce folded her gloves with the kind of accuracy that suggests either careful living or careful lying. "The Trust's Premier Award, the Golden Palette, will be announced Sunday night," she said. "It's become, forgive me, Mr. Wolfe, more influential than Michelin for this town. The finalists are 4 restaurants. They are passionate." She let that sit a second. "In the last month, we've had 3 incidents. Anonymous complaints about health code violations that turned out to be fakes. A supplier invoice leaked to the tabloids, and last night, one of our sealed judging dossiers disappeared from our office and reappeared half an hour later in our lobby, tampered with. That," Wolfe said, "is either sabotage or incompetence. Why are you here instead of at police headquarters, raising the alarm and the blood pressure?" "Because the tampering was subtle," she said. "No fingerprints, no cameras show a suspect, and because a scandal will do more damage than a flawed decision. The trust thrives on the illusion of omniscience. If our process is seen to be compromised, the donor who underwrites us will withdraw. The award will be empty." Wolfe made a face that, on anyone else, would be called a wince. On him, it was policy. "You want me to guard your illusion?" "No," she said, and met his eyes as if that had been part of the audition. "I want you to find the saboteur before Sunday, so the right winner is named for the right reasons. I want your precision, your reputation for thoroughness." She glanced at me. "And Mr. Goodwin's legs?" "Madam," I said, "my legs come with the rest of me." "You should raise your fee for them," she said. "They have a certain effrontery." Wolfe drummed a thumb as if the desk were making a poor argument. "Your board," he asked, "is composed of gourmands, philanthropists, and ex-chefs, yes? That is one kind of problem. Your finalists, these 4 restaurants, represent another. Between boards and finalists lies a paved avenue of resentment wide enough to parade a marching band with tubas. I should be told, without embroidery, who has the motive to ruin the process and why." "All of them," she said, "to win." One of them to cheat, and one person on our board to make sure the winner is a certain chef with whom she shares a history. Names, Wolfe said and lifted a palm. Not now. Archie. Yes, sir, I said. Take 'em down when she gives them. Meaning, if Wolfe wanted the names now, he'd say so. He didn't. Miss Allardyce had been waiting to produce a prop. She reached into her bag and set a small metal cylinder on the edge of my desk. It was the size of a salt shaker and worn smooth the way money gets after it's been popular. This, she said, was in our dossier drawer. It shouldn't have been. It's a micro-container for saffron threads. From an old Spanish family. A collector's item. She said the last as if that made it half saint, half sin. Wolfe didn't lean. He also didn't blink. The container was in the drawer. How does that tarnish your process? Because the drawer is locked and only 3 people have keys, she said. Because an identical container, empty, was found last week in the private kitchen of Chef Gabriel Mazone, one of the finalists. And because Chef Mazone is known for a risotto that once used saffron so extravagantly, the trust had to pretend not to be impressed. You want me to prove, Wolfe said, that your board is not corrupt by showing that only one person is corrupt. I want you to find the mind behind the tampering, she said. I'm not asking you to guard me, Mr. Wolfe. I'm asking you to vindicate the standard you live by. That was a neat line. The kind that can get a trout to the surface. Wolfe's mouth softened. Your fee, he said. Whatever you customarily charge, she said. There is no customary, he said. There is only adequate. Archie will advise you after I have decided whether to accept. Your time constraint is Sunday, which is intolerable, but hunger often is. She stood. She had delivered what she came to deliver and wasn't going to beg. The dossiers are at our office. I can arrange access. The board members will see you. The chefs will not unless coerced by publicity. The donor will not speak. He has an allergy to daylight. Then he should move to Norway in June, I said, and she spared me a smile that would have gotten her a free appetizer in any joint with a maitre d'. She held out a card. I took it and added it to my deck. When she had gone, the house exhaled into the quiet it prefers. Wolfe closed his eyes. I waited a full minute. There's an art to not poking a bear while also getting him to wake up and commit. On the 60th second, he opened them again and looked toward the kitchen, which he does when thinking about something he despises and loves. No, he said. No, I said. I will not rescue an institution from itself in 4 days to earn the gratitude of no one and the rancor of many, he said. You may tell Miss Allardyce that my sympathies are culinary, not institutional. Okay, I said, but if I tell her that, she'll think you're haggling for an orchid. He gave me a glare for desecrating the motives of a man with a greenhouse and a soul. Pfui, he said. I'm haggling with myself. The doorbell rang. That was the second violation before lunch. I went and found a delivery man with a wicker hamper so big it looked like it had eaten a smaller hamper on the way over. He had a clipboard with my name on it and an address label to our brownstone, which I checked twice. He also had the expression of a man whose relationship with curiosity had ended badly. For the kitchen, he said, and thrust the clipboard at me. From La Société des Aromates. That how you say it? I don't say it at all, I told him, scribbling. What's in it? He shrugged like an alibi. I don't know, lady at the counter said it was perishable. It is one of the proud traditions of the brownstone that packages addressed to the kitchen are inspected by Fritz first, who knows more about the difference between good fungus and bad ideas than most doctors. I hauled the hamper through the hall toward the swing door and called, Fritz, special delivery. Fritz came out with his apron on and a spoon in his hand that had appeared in better photographs than I have. He smiled at the hamper like it was a cousin from the old country. Ah, from Aromates. They are reliable. Once they sent me a lemon that smelled like my childhood. He clicked his tongue and bent to the lid. Careful, I said. I've seen surprises turn out to be gifts, and gifts turn out to be subpoenas. He gave me a look that said he would not have gotten to 60-odd with all his fingers by trusting strangers. He unlatched the wicker with that same measured attention he gives to the first whisk of egg whites. The kitchen, on the other side of the swing door, breathed out more time. Wolfe once said that the house is a body and the kitchen is the heart. You don't poke the heart without consequences. We carried the hamper through. Fritz set it on the butcher block and tested the lid with 2 fingers. He sniffed. "Spices," he said, and his eyebrows came up. "But something else?" "Ugh." He opened the lid. 2 things happened. A smell came out that didn't belong to spices, and Fritz, who is not a man to be rattled by anything that ever grew in soil, made a small sound that I'd last heard from a clarinetist who had just swallowed a bee. I stepped in. The smell was cold metal and a cheap cologne that had big dreams. On top was paper, brown, folded, tied with string, and that old country thoroughness that says, "Don't look, you'll spoil the surprise." Fritz fumbled the string. I cut it. The paper peeled back. Below it were several small tins, some labeled, some vintage, and a nest of straw. The straw had something in it that wasn't straw. "Archie," Fritz said, quiet and focused. He pulled aside 2 tins, and then I saw a wrist with a cheap bracelet and a hand that had never met a manicure. The skin had that gray color that isn't fashionable because it doesn't last. I didn't say anything. There's a time to yell for effect, and a time to respect the acoustics of the dead. I eased the straw back with the knife. The hand belonged to an arm in a dark suit. The rest of the body had been folded in the hamper with the creativity of a packer who had figured proportions better than morality. Fritz backed away and put the spoon down. He's not a waiter. He doesn't drop things. He just put it down, carefully, as if you could lower your voice with objects. "What?" he said. "What is this?" "A man," I said. "A dead one." "Who is he?" Fritz asked. If I knew everyone who wore a suit bought 2 seasons ago and cologne chosen by a girl at a counter, I'd charge Wolfe double, I said. "Call Mr. Wolfe." Fritz didn't have to be asked twice. He moved for the intercom by the wall, but I stopped him. "I'll do it," I said. "You sit, and don't touch anything." He nodded, swallowed, and sat at the little side table where he planned menus and could now, with a slight shift in perspective, plan alibis. I went to the office. Wolfe had not moved an inch, which is normal. His eyes another inch. That was news. I closed the door behind me because the scent of that cologne would not care about boundaries. "Someone," I said, "has delivered you a hamper full of spices and a remarkably uncooperative guest." He closed his eyes, because my gift for headlines deserves protection. "Describe." "Male," I said. "White. Mid-30s to early 40s. Cheap bracelet. Dark suit that's making its last appearance." The cargo compartment of a wicker hamper was used to get him past my sunny disposition. "He smells like $10 of regret." The hamper label said, "La Société des Aromates." Wolfe's mouth became a straight line you could set a level on. "In my kitchen," he said. "In your kitchen," I confirmed. "Where we do not, as a rule, keep bodies." He pressed his lips together, then opened them. "Has he bled?" "Not so's we need new floors," I said. "On an initial survey, no obvious bleed. He looks deposited. If there is blood, it's not on the surface." He breathed once, deep. "Archie." "Yes, sir?" The phone. I went to the desk phone. He didn't have to say it. The late Inspector Kramer of Homicide West, if he had been retired, would have made a hobby of hating Wolfe regardless. As it was, Inspector Kramer was on active duty and had made a profession of hating Wolfe with perks. I dialed headquarters and asked for him. While I waited, Wolfe spoke without taking his eyes off the middle distance, where he keeps principles he isn't using at the moment. "Fritz?" "In the kitchen, seated," I said. "On my direction." He didn't touch anything except the hamper before we knew. Wolfe nodded once. He values Fritz the way most men value their right hand and both lungs. When Kramer came on, I adjusted my tone to the one you use with men who've seen too much of you for comfort. Yes, he barked. Kramer doesn't say hello. He says yes, and the rest of us are supposed to justify our existence. Goodwin, I said. At the brownstone, I've got a hamper in our kitchen that came from a spice house and contains a dead man and some saffron tins. We would like you to retrieve both the citizen and your good mood. There was a couple of beats while a mental cigar was removed and a mental desk was banged with a knuckle. In Wolfe's kitchen. That's what you should put in your report, I said. It has that certain ring. I'll be there in 10, he said, and hung up because he knows that's my favorite part. I set the phone down. Wolfe had closed his eyes again, but this time it wasn't contemplation. It was something I had seen only twice before, the expression of a man for whom a sacred place had just been sneezed in. He opened them and said, "Fetch me the hamper label." I went to the kitchen and used my handkerchief to detach the label from the handle. Fritz watched me like a man watching the verdict. I brought it back. Wolfe examined it, then held it out to me. "Call Miss Allardyce," he said. I aimed for innocence. "To tell her we've decided to pass." "To tell her," he said, "that I will see the dossiers this afternoon, and that she is not to approach La Société des Aromates or the board until I instruct her to, and that she is to tell no one that she has engaged me." I stared at him. "Because?" He grunted. Wolfe has a scale of grunts that ranges from "go away" to "bring beer." This one was, "the world is tiresome." "Because," he said, "someone has conflated gastronomy with criminal delivery. Either this was meant for us, or it was meant to pass through us. Either way, the kitchen is trespassed and will not be used as a post office. I will not tolerate it." "Yes, sir," I said. I went to the phone and dialed Miss Allardyce's card. She answered on the third ring with the efficiency of a woman who had delegated the habit of sleeping. "Goodwin," I said, "we'll see your dossiers at 3. Don't speak to anyone at the Spice House or your board. And for the record, Miss Allardyce, if you didn't send a hamper from La Société des Aromates to our kitchen, someone else did, and the someone had unusual taste in cologne." Her breath caught, then steadied. "A hamper?" "Yes," I said, "containing a man who won't be dining with us." "My God," she said. "You can borrow that," I told her, "but don't spend it. 3 o'clock. I hung up to spare her the trouble. Wolfe had not moved his eyes from the label as if the letters might confess out of loneliness. The doorbell rang again, and this time the bell sounded like it wanted a raise. I went and let in Inspector Kramer and 2 men who knew what to do with a room. Kramer took one look at my face and then at the kitchen door and got the idea. He didn't remove his hat. He just jammed it back and marched through like Sherman at a parade. What followed was a familiar ballet, if ballet had featured men in bad suits and better expressions. Photographs were taken. Measurements were made. Dust was swabbed from the hamper as if it might have a conscience. Kramer did not speak for 5 minutes, which for him is the equivalent of a sabbatical. When he did, it was to me. "You found him?" he asked. "In the strictest sense, Aromates found him," I said. "We just opened the hamper." "Who the hell is Aromates?" he demanded. "A spice house that charges you extra for the story," I said. The hamper was addressed to the kitchen. It was delivered at 11:28. The card says La Société des Aromates. The cologne says someone who doesn't value subtlety. Kramer took the label with a gloved finger and looked at it as if it had voted the wrong way. He sniffed the air and made a face. "That stink. You got a name for it?" "Nothing printable," I said. "But if you ask the nearest $12 barber, he'll give you a bottle." He looked at me and then over my shoulder at the door to the office. which was shut. "Wolfe," he said, as if testing the word for something bitter. "He know anything you're not telling me?" "He knows he's taking a case he told me 5 minutes ago he wasn't taking," I said. "He also knows his kitchen has been used to deliver a corpse, and he takes that personally. If I were you, I would not confuse his cooperation with his forgiveness." He snorted. "I never confuse Wolfe with anything that won't give me indigestion." He gestured to the hamper. "We'll move it, carefully. You'll both stay put." "Inspector," I said, "if I had a nickel for every time you said that, I wouldn't need to report my income." He sized me up for a retort, then thought better of it because the room did smell and the dead man was making his point. He turned to his men. "Wrap it," he said. "And find me where the hell that came from. La Société des Aromates. If it's a hole in the wall, put a lid on the hole." They worked. Wolfe stayed in his chair and did not honor us with an appearance. That wasn't disdain. That was doctrine. The first rule of a violated sanctuary is that you do not chase the violators through it. You sit and you make your sanctuary bigger than their brains. When they were gone, with the hamper, the body, and enough of our household air to make me consider buying stock in windows, Wolfe finally spoke. "Archie," he said, "you will go to La Société des Aromates. You will not touch, but you will smell. You will not accuse, but you will observe. You will find who sent the hamper. If they sent it, we will discuss time and punishment. If they did not, we will find who used their name." "And if they ask why we're interested?" I asked. "Say," he said, and his voice had that agreeable note it gets when he is irritated enough to be precise, "that Fritz has a policy. He does not accept deliveries of men." He breathed. "Also that I am—" He paused and selected the word as if it were a garnish. "Annoyed." The house had returned to the sound it makes when it is listening to itself. In the kitchen, Fritz was humming a tune he used when he had to reassert control over an omelette or a day. I got my hat and my notebook and slid the label into a paper sleeve, and as I reached the door, Wolfe added, "Archie." "Yes. Miss Allardyce is only incidentally concerned with taste," he said. "She's principally concerned with power. Do not flatter her with the wrong kind." "You'll have to define the right kind," I said. "I will," he said, "when you return." I went out into a city that had just discovered what our kitchen already knew. Tuesday had gotten personal. I hit the sidewalk with the label in my pocket and the mood of a man who'd just seen a corpse where a casserole should be. Wolfe didn't like being disturbed, and the kitchen was as sacred as his orchids. When someone manages to mix spices and homicide on his doorstep, that's not a case. It's a crusade. La Société des Aromates was on 47th, near 6th, a little sliver of shop wedged between a wine importer and a tailor that specialized in evening regret. The sign was discreet gold on black, and the window display could have given a priest second thoughts. Tins, glass jars, dried roots, and powders that looked like they'd all been on first-name terms with Marco Polo. The air inside smelled like someone had bottled curiosity and marked it up 20%. Behind the counter stood a woman with dark hair and the posture of someone who could make a spice jar blush for being disorganized. She had the faint accent of somewhere east of Lion and west of Suspicion. The tag on her blouse said El Devereaux, and she looked at me like she had a list of customers who mattered, and I wasn't on it yet. "Good afternoon," I said, giving her my best innocent by association smile. "I'm here about a delivery from your establishment to West 35th Street. Brownstone, red door, full kitchen. Came this morning around 11:30. Her brow creased, a polite tremor of confusion. "I'm afraid we make many deliveries, monsieur. If you have an invoice or order number." I pulled out the label in its paper sleeve, unfolded it with care, and slid it across. "This one." It arrived at our place along with a man who had already lost his appetite permanently. The faintest flicker crossed her face. enough to tell me she wasn't rehearsing surprise. She touched the label as though it might bite. "This is not one of ours," she said after a beat too long. "The format, yes, the typeface. Someone copied it. But our numbering code, see here, the small dash? Ours are marked with an accent over the E in Société. This is missing it." "That's a small detail," I said. "Big enough to hold a body." Her mouth tightened. "We sell saffron and cinnamon, Mr. Goodwin, Archie Goodwin." I gave her the smile that makes hotel clerks hand me better rooms. "We also received a tin or two of your stock in that same hamper. Authentic, I'd say. That's how the trick works. Real flavor, fake label, and an unexpected garnish." She looked like she was about to deny everything again, then exhaled. "We had a visitor yesterday," she said. "A gentleman. Italian, perhaps Sicilian. He asked many questions about our packaging. Too many. I thought he was a rival trying to imitate us." "Description?" I asked. "Tall, dark hair, graying at the sides, a nose that had met resistance once. He said his name was Mazzone, Gabriel Mazzone." That hit a familiar note, one of Allardyce's finalists. "Chef Mazzone," I said. "Did he buy anything?" "A tin of saffron, paid cash, left quickly." "Did he mention where it was going?" "No, only that it was a gift." I thanked her and left her with my card. Outside, the day was thinning toward mid-afternoon. I called a cab, gave the driver the address of Mazzone's restaurant, Trattoria Il Ponte, and watched the city go by in reverse reflection. Il Ponte was the kind of place that dressed its waiters better than its patrons. The maitre d' recognized my type, too sharp for lunch, too late for dinner, and tried to stall me with politeness until I dropped Wolfe's name like a shell casing. That got me escorted through the dining room, past tables of midday romance and business deception, and into a kitchen humming with stainless steel precision. Mazzone himself was at the stove, sleeves rolled, hair slicked back, tasting a sauce with the expression of a man deciding between pride and sin. He turned when he saw me and frowned like I'd stepped into his confessional. "You're not a food critic," he said. "You don't eat like one." "I'm not," I said. "I'm looking for someone who borrowed your name and your spice supplier to deliver a body to my employer's kitchen." He froze, spoon midair. "A what?" "A man. Dead. Wrapped up with a few of your favorite ingredients. You were at La Société des Aromates yesterday." His jaw tightened. "Yes. I buy my saffron there. That's not a crime." "No, but imitation labels might be. Someone used their stationery, and your visit gives you an alibi that's either convenient or clever." He turned down the flame under the pan. "I didn't send anything. If someone wants to ruin me, they picked the right way. I'm already under suspicion with the trust. They think I bribed a judge last year." "Did you?" He gave a short laugh. "If I had, I'd have won." "No, Mr. Goodwin, I play clean. Most of the time." There was something in his tone that wanted to sound weary but landed unrehearsed. I asked about the missing dossier from the trust's office. He shook his head. "I heard. It's a mess. Margot Allardyce runs that circus like she's auditioning for sainthood, but she's got devils on the payroll." "Any of them with enough ambition to plant a corpse?" "Plenty," he said, "but none with your address." I thanked him, left a card on the counter, and stepped back into the city air that smelled like steam and secrets. On the ride home, I thought about the symmetry. A fake label, a dead man, a chef with something to lose, and a trust that wanted purity more than truth. Wolfe would be ready to draw lines between them, but only after I'd fetched him the ink. When I got back to the brownstone, the police were gone, and the kitchen smelled of disinfectant. Wolfe was in his chair, eyes half shut, lips pursed like a man tasting logic. "Well," he said. "Mazzone was at the spice shop yesterday. Bought saffron, left his name behind, and swears he didn't send the hamper." The shopkeeper says the labels are fake. Pfui, Wolfe muttered. Too neat. Continue. She described him accurately, though, and he's nervous. Claims the trust's board is full of devils. Wolfe opened his eyes. Then we will need to identify which devil uses perfume. He lifted the fake label again, turning it under the lamp. A counterfeit of quality demands a craftsman. Whoever forged this is not new to deceit. Archie, tomorrow morning you will visit the trust's offices, see their files, their locks, and their people. In particular, observe Miss Allardyce's staff. Somewhere among them is the nose for both spice and scandal. He looked up at me, eyes glinting with controlled ire. And Archie, if another parcel arrives, even one labeled Mercy, you will refuse delivery. The kitchen has been profaned once. It will not be again. The next morning began the way mornings usually do at the brownstone, quiet, structured, and suspiciously civilized. Wolfe was upstairs with his orchids, which meant that until 11 o'clock, civilization was my responsibility. Fritz had reclaimed the kitchen's dignity by baking bread that smelled like redemption, and the only sign of yesterday's visitor from the wicker world was a faint dent in the butcher block where the hamper had sat. If I hadn't seen it myself, I might have believed the whole business a bad dream. Except that Wolfe doesn't dream, he calculates. At 10 sharp, I called the Metropolitan Gastronomic Trust and was told Miss Allardyce would expect me at 11:30. That was cutting close to Wolfe's descent from the plant rooms, but he had already given me my orders. Visit, observe, report, and don't irritate anyone too early in the day. I took that last part as a suggestion rather than a command. The Trust's offices occupied the 4th floor of a polished midtown building with marble that looked too new to have been honest. The receptionist, a young woman with hair like a champagne ad and an expression to match, showed me into Miss Allardyce's office after asking twice how to spell Goodwin. The office was the size of Wolfe's kitchen, though less appetizing, and arranged like a grant proposal, impressive on the surface, questionable underneath. Margot Allardyce rose from behind her desk and came forward with a handshake that would have startled a nun. She was dressed in navy, crisp as a verdict, and she looked tired in a way that only expensive people do. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, and I noticed she didn't ask if we'd made progress. That kind of restraint is either diplomacy or guilt. "Miss Allardyce," I said, "your dossiers, where are they kept?" "In the records room," she said, motioning toward a side door. "Our secretary, Mr. Hayes, manages access. He's thorough to the point of zealotry." "Zealotry's nice in religion," I said. "In filing, it usually means someone's hiding the hymnal." She allowed herself a thin smile. "You may look, of course. But please understand, our judges and sponsors value discretion. These dossiers contain financials, personal details, and opinions that could ruin reputations if mishandled." "I'll handle them gently," I said. "I was raised among secrets." She led me through to the records room, where a tall, sandy-haired man sat at a desk with the posture of a question mark and the face of someone who had long ago stopped enjoying his job. His tie was frayed, his eyes watchful, and he had the delicate hands of a man who prefers paper to people. "Mr. Hayes," Miss Allardyce said, "this is Mr. Goodwin, working with Mr. Wolfe. He has permission to inspect the judging dossiers." Hayes nodded once and gestured toward a row of locked metal cabinets. "Each finalist has a separate file. The missing one was Chef Mazone's. Returned intact, supposedly." "Supposedly," I repeated. "And who found it?" "I did," Hayes said. "In the lobby, between deliveries. Someone must have slipped it through the mail slot during the night." "Anyone else have keys?" "Miss Allardyce, myself, and our treasurer, Mrs. Enderley." The name rang a faint bell. Allardyce had mentioned a board member with history involving one of the chefs. I filed that in the active drawer. "And the cleaning crew?" I asked. "They don't touch this room," Hayes said sharply, as if I'd accused him of heresy. I do the filing myself. I spent the next 20 minutes going through the cabinets under his benevolent supervision. The dossiers were neatly arranged, cross-referenced, and dull enough to make an accountant weep. Mazone's file had been resealed with fresh tape. Careful, clean, professional. Too professional. Inside were tasting notes, score sheets, and a brief on the chef's background. Everything looked proper except one page that had been inserted backward. When I turned it, I found faint smudges along the bottom edge. Saffron yellow, like the powder from aromatiz. Curious shade for office work, I said casually. Hayes leaned forward. Oh, probably from the samples. Miss Allardyce sometimes keeps promotional items here. Uh-huh. I took out my handkerchief and pressed it gently against the stain, folded it and slipped it into my inside pocket. I'll return this after Mr. Wolfe sniffs at it. When I left the trust, I had 3 facts worth their weight in truffles. Someone with access to the files had handled saffron recently. The missing dossier had been tampered with but restored too neatly, and Miss Allardyce's staff was a triangle, herself, Hayes, and Mrs. Enderley, each side pretending not to notice the other was loaded. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was at his desk, massive and motionless, a glass of beer beside him like a loyal subject. I reported the trip in detail, saving the saffron stain for dessert. When I handed over the handkerchief, he raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. He unfolded it, sniffed once, and said, "The same grade as the threads found in the hampertins. Distinctly La Mancha, not counterfeit." So the person who handled that dossier also handled the spice. "Precisely," he said. "We will therefore assume the dossier was altered by the same hand that tampered with the hamper. What is your impression of Miss Allardyce's subordinates? Hayes looks like he alphabetizes his breakfast cereal, and Mrs. Enderley, well, I haven't met her yet, but if she's the sentimental type, she hides it well. Allardyce keeps her people in straight lines." Wolfe tapped a finger on the desk. "And yet someone within those lines bends. I dislike hypocrisy, Archie. It smells worse than deceit." "Then this case must be a full buffet," I said. He ignored me, which meant I'd scored. "You will see Mrs. Enderley this afternoon. Obtain her view of Mazone. Observe, do not provoke. Women of her type, moral pretenders, often mistake courtesy for weakness. And if she slaps me with her moral pretensions, then you will smile," he said, "and inform her that moralists and criminals share one virtue: persistence." He leaned back, half closing his eyes. The kitchen violated, the trust corrupted, and saffron, once the most innocent of indulgences, now serves as a signature. Whoever devised this admixture understands both appetite and power. They will soon learn that I understand both better. That was my cue to grab my hat and hit the pavement again. If Wolfe was sharpening his intellect for battle, I had to collect the ammunition. Mrs. Enderley was next on the list, and I had the distinct feeling she wasn't going to like the questions I brought, or the answers she'd have to give. Mrs. Enderley lived on the east side, in one of those cooperative buildings that think a doorman is a personality trait. The marble lobby had the usual perfume of money pretending to be cleanliness, and the elevator operator gave me a look that said visitors with my kind of hat didn't usually get past the desk. I told him I had an appointment with Mrs. Enderley on behalf of the Metropolitan Gastronomic Trust, which got me the kind of smile people use when they're about to gossip later. She opened the door herself, which surprised me. I'd expected a maid, or, at minimum, a well-trained poodle. Instead, there she stood, slender, white-haired, dressed in grey silk that didn't advertise itself. Her eyes were the colour of weak tea, but there was nothing weak about the way she studied me. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, already knowing. "Do come in. Miss Allardyce phoned to say you might call." The apartment smelled faintly of old books and stronger gin. She led me to a sitting room where everything had an opinion about itself. Chairs that looked uncomfortable on purpose, paintings that thought they were profound. I sat where she indicated, on a sofa that might have been designed by an orthopedist. "I understand you're assisting Mr. Wolfe," she said, settling opposite me. "He has a reputation for delicacy in matters of discretion. I hope this one will remain discreet. That depends on how much the situation insists on being otherwise," I said. "You're on the Trust's board, correct? Treasurer?" Her mouth twitched in something halfway between amusement and dismissal. "Yes. I manage the accounts, which is more honest work than most of our members care for. Margot handles the politics. I handle the numbers." "And the missing dossier?" I asked. "Any theories?" "Only that it's been blown out of proportion," she said coolly. "A clerical error, perhaps. Mr. Hayes guards those files like a dragon, and if you're implying that Gabriel Mazzone had something to do with it, I'd advise you to find a more likely villain." "That's a quick defense," I said, "especially for someone whose chef friend has been accused of cheating." "Friend," she repeated, as if the word were an insult. "Gabriel and I were acquainted years ago, before the Trust existed. He was a rising chef, and I believed in helping talent where I saw it. I arranged introductions. He rewarded me with charm, then with debt. I learned my lesson. And now you're one of the judges deciding whether he gets a prize worth a small fortune in reputation." "That's precisely why Margot insisted I recuse myself," she said, though I failed to see how that prevents me from wishing him ill. "Fair enough," I said. "Do you know anyone who might have wanted to frame him or you for tampering with the dossiers?" She smiled thinly. "Mr. Goodwin, everyone in that organization is either seeking favor or avoiding scandal. If you want to find who tampered with our process, look for who benefits from purity. That's always the dirtiest motive." It was a good line. Too good. I was about to press when her eyes flicked past me toward a door down the hall. "Excuse me," she said, rising. "I believe the kettle has boiled over." She disappeared through the doorway. I used the interval like a professional sinner, efficiently and without guilt. A small writing desk stood near the window, neat except for a ledger and an opened envelope bearing the letterhead of La Société des Aromates. I moved close enough to read the first line. "Madame Enderley, as per your request, we confirm receipt of your payment for private import." The rest was obscured by a folded page. When she returned, I was admiring a painting of fruit that looked as though it had died of boredom. She carried a tray with 2 cups of tea and a composure that might have fooled a priest. "Do you take sugar?" she asked. "I take facts," I said, "preferably unrefined." Her smile didn't move her eyes. "Then you'll leave here hungry." I thanked her for the tea, which I didn't touch, and left after a few more polite exchanges. In the elevator, I wrote down the letterhead before it could vanish into memory. Wolfe wasn't going to like the coincidence. Aromats again, this time linked to a board member who claimed to have sworn off chefs but still wrote checks to spice merchants. Back at Tourne, the brownstone. Wolfe was mid-lunch, which meant entering the dining room required diplomacy. He was dissecting a trout while Fritz stood by, armed with sauce and deference. I waited until he dabbed his lips before delivering my report. "Mrs. Enderley," I said, "keeps her secrets alphabetized. Claims to hate Malzone, but still pays his spice supplier. And the letter from Aromates was dated last week." He grunted. "Describe it." "Formal, businesslike, not promotional. Acknowledged payment for a private import. No item listed." Wolfe set down his fork. "Aromates again," he murmured. "This is not commerce. This is a conduit." "For what?" "For whatever passes between those who understand that taste is the most elegant disguise for greed." He pushed his plate aside. "Archie, when you have finished tormenting policemen and widows, summon Saul Panzer. We shall require his eyes. Someone used Aromates as an intermediary, perhaps for the spice, perhaps for what the spice concealed. And Mrs. Enderley, whose palate once guided Gabriel Mazzone's rise, now purchases from the same source." "Phooey." He leaned back. eyes half-lidded. "It is beginning to cohere, Archie. The body in our kitchen was not sent as a threat, but as a message. Someone wished to demonstrate that even sanctuaries can be spoiled." "Message to who?" "To me," Wolfe said simply, "or to Margot Allardyce, through me. But we shall discover which before the saffron loses its scent." That was Wolfe's version of a battle cry. "I phoned Saul Panzer, gave him the address of Aromates, and told him to find out who had placed large private orders in the past month. When I hung up, the phone rang again. Fritz answered, listened, and turned to me with a look I didn't like. "It is Inspector Kramer," he said. "He asks for you." I took the receiver. "Goodwin." Kramer's voice was gravel with caffeine. "We've ID'd your hamper guest. Name's Vincent Lally. Used to work at the Trust until a year ago. Bookkeeper, small-time numbers man. Fired for skimming. Skimming saffron or cash?" "Both," Kramer growled. "And one more thing. Your Miss Allardyce didn't mention that Lally tried to blackmail her 6 months back. Wanted hush money for something he found in the financials. She didn't pay. Now he turns up dead in Wolfe's kitchen. Explain that." "I'd love to," I said, "but I'd rather hear it from her first." He hung up with a grunt that meant, "Don't get smart." I turned toward Wolfe, who had been listening with the patience of a boulder. "Lally worked for the Trust," I said. "Fired for skimming and tried to blackmail Allardyce. Kramer thinks she's hiding something." Wolfe's eyes opened fully. "Then," he said, "it appears Miss Allardyce's concern for the integrity of her institution was not as selfless as she claimed. Archie, tomorrow she will come to us again, invited. And when she does, we shall see whether her appetite for truth exceeds her appetite for reputation." He reached for his beer, and I knew the session was over. Outside, the city kept cooking whatever recipe it was on, but inside the brownstone the heat had just begun to rise. At 11 the next morning, Miss Allardyce arrived looking like she'd had breakfast with her conscience and found it indigestible. She was dressed in black this time, less glamour, more armor, and the tightness in her jaw suggested she already knew that Wolfe didn't summon people to repeat compliments. Fritz showed her in, and I shut the office door behind her. Wolfe didn't bother rising. He rarely does for anyone who still has a pulse. His eyes tracked her the way a cat follows a bird, steady, patient, waiting for an opening. "Miss Allardyce," he said, "you have my gratitude for coming. Sit, if you please." She sat, crossing one leg over the other, hands clasped too firmly on her knee. "You said you had developments, Mr. Wolfe." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "The body delivered to my kitchen was identified as Vincent Lally, your former bookkeeper." She blinked, but not with surprise. "Yes, Inspector Kramer called me this morning. It's horrible." "Horrible, yes," Wolfe said, "but also instructive. Mr. Lally was dismissed from your trust for financial impropriety, and some months later attempted to blackmail you. You did not inform me of that when you came to engage my services." She hesitated. I didn't think it was relevant to the tampering of the award dossiers. "Pfui," Wolfe said softly. "A man who blackmails and a man who ends up dead in a hamper, labeled for a culinary supplier, are kin, not strangers. You omitted it because you feared it would expose a weakness. Yours." Her lips tightened. "If you mean I was foolish enough to trust someone who later betrayed me, yes. But I didn't kill him, Mr. Wolfe." "No," Wolfe said, "but perhaps you supplied the motive for someone else to think you might have." I watched her swallow that. The silence had the texture of hot tar. Finally, she said, "You think the two events, the sabotage and Lally's death, are connected?" "I think," Wolfe replied, "that they are branches of the same diseased tree." "Tell me, who besides you knew of Lally's blackmail attempt?" "No one," she said quickly. "Not officially. Perhaps Mrs. Enderley suspected. She manages the books. But I never told her outright." Wolfe's eyelids lowered a fraction, the equivalent of a shout. Mrs. Enderley has been importing saffron privately from La Société des Aromatiques. Would you care to explain why your treasurer would engage in expensive personal trade with your organization's supplier? That landed. She turned toward me, as if I might offer an easier exit. I didn't know that, she said. But Mrs. Enderley has a taste for luxury. She's not above leveraging our contacts for her own use. Or, Wolfe said, for someone else's. He reached for a folder from his desk and opened it with ceremonial gravity. Mr. Goodwin learned yesterday that Gabriel Masson, the chef you implied was under suspicion, visited erupts shortly before the body arrived. A coincidence, perhaps. But now we find your treasurer dealing with the same house. Erupts seems to be the common spice in this otherwise unsavory stew. Miss Allardyce leaned forward, her voice low. You believe one of them sent that hamper? I believe, Wolfe said, someone wished to implicate you by routing a corpse through your investigator. A corpse connected to your past and to the trust's corruption. The choice of delivery address, my kitchen, was deliberate. Whoever planned this knows that I despise intrusion. They wanted my ire directed at you, to make me your adversary rather than your ally. That got her attention. Then you were never meant to solve it. On the contrary, Wolfe said dryly, I was meant to refuse it. Unfortunately for our saboteur, I'm contrary by habit. She almost smiled, faintly, then stopped herself. What do you need from me? Candor, Wolfe said, and access. I require every financial record for the trust, particularly those related to your suppliers. If Mrs. Enderley or Mr. Hayes protests, tell them I have your authorization to audit their souls. I'll send them this afternoon, she said. Anything else? Yes. A name. The donor who underwrites your award. Her hesitation lasted half a heartbeat too long. He prefers anonymity. His preference, Wolfe said, has already proven costly. I want his name. She exhaled. Vincent R. Devereaux. I looked up from my notepad. Devereaux? Same as the woman at erupts. Wolfe's eyes opened slowly, like a curtain lifting on inevitability. Elle Devereaux, he said softly. The lady who confirmed Masson's purchase and the forgery of the label. A relative. His daughter, Allardyce said, though he rarely admits it. She manages his import ventures. Ah. Wolfe folded his hands. Then we have the architecture of it. A father funding an institution, a daughter running a supplier, a board entangled with both, and a corpse tying them together with twine and deceit. A well-constructed labyrinth, though, alas, built by amateurs. She stared at him. What do you intend to do? Nothing yet, Wolfe said. Doing is vulgar. Thinking, however, is civilized. He dismissed her with emotion so small it barely qualified as movement. When she left, I shut the door behind her and turned back to Wolfe. Well, I said, we've got a dead ex-employee, a financier with a family business in exotic groceries, and a treasurer buying saffron like it's stock futures. You think one of them planted the body? Not one, Wolfe said. All, in different ways. The corpse was a message, yes, but also a cover. Someone exploited the delivery to hide something else, something small enough to fit among the tins and overlooked by the police. Archie, tomorrow you will visit the morgue. Retrieve Lally's effects. In particular, see whether any container or trinket was found on him that the hamper might have concealed. Sure, I said, and if I find something spicy, I'll bring it home. He frowned. This is not whimsy, Archie. Whoever engineered this crime traffics in symbols. Saffron for wealth, spice for temptation, a body for corruption. They are trying to communicate. Communicate what? That purity, moral or culinary, is an illusion, Wolfe said quietly, which makes them either a cynic or a philosopher. I prefer cynics. They are less tedious to expose. He lifted his glass, studying the amber light through the beer. When we summon them all here, Archie, and we shall, they will learn that deceit, like flavor, loses potency when overused. It wasn't a declaration. It was a promise, delivered with the calm certainty of a man who'd already set the trap. And I knew as I left him to his beer and his contempt that the kitchen might have been cleansed, but the real heat was still coming. The morgue has never been my favorite stop, but there are times when it's the only place in town that offers straight talk, cold, quiet, and unembellished. The attendant recognized me from past unpleasantness and didn't bother with the sign-in. When you show up often enough, you stop being a visitor and start being furniture. He led me to a narrow metal table where Vincent Lally was waiting, zipped up in a bag that couldn't be mistaken for anything else. They'd cleaned him up, if that's the right term. The gray suit was folded neatly nearby, the cheap bracelet set aside in an evidence tray with a few coins and a broken keychain. No wallet, no watch. The bracelet had the initials VL scratched on the inner band. Homemade personalization. I asked for the rest of his effects, and the attendant produced a small envelope. Cufflinks, a matchbook from Trattoria Il Ponte, and a flattened tin about the size of $50. Found it in his inside pocket, the attendant said. Thought it was a snuff box at first, but it's empty. I took it, turned it over, and there it was. A faint engraving of a stylized A, identical to the mark on the saffron tins from the hamper. Aromates again. Someone was collecting their brand like a signature. I slipped the tin into my coat and left, signing the log like I was closing a chapter. The day outside had turned gray, a drizzle slicking the streets with that sheen New York does best, reflective, treacherous, and honest only when it's wet. I cabbed back to the brownstone, rehearsing how Wolfe would turn this into another layer of logic. He was in the office when I came in, reading the Times as though it might confess if held long. Enough. Fritz had served him the mid-morning beer, and the bottle stood like punctuation beside the desk. Lally, I said, didn't die rich, but he died organized. His pockets gave up one aromatase tin, empty, engraved with their mark, and a matchbook from Mazzone's restaurant. Ah, Wolfe murmured. He extended his hand. I gave him the tin, and he examined it through half-closed eyes, his fingers moving slowly over the surface. Not merely a container, he said. This was meant to carry something delicate, valuable, perhaps dangerous. If it arrived empty, then its contents were removed before delivery. By who? The police didn't report finding anything else. Of course not, he said irritably. They look for crimes, not meanings. He set the tin down. Archie, we will assume the tin originally held something worth killing for. You will go again to La Société des Aromates. This time, speak not with Miss Devereux, but with her shipping clerk. He will have less discretion and perhaps more guilt. And if he throws me out, then you will go back after lunch when guilt ripens. I left him to his metaphors and headed downtown. Aromates was quieter than before, but the smell was the same, sharp, exotic, expensive. The shipping room was behind the counter, and a short man in a brown apron was counting boxes with the precision of a miser. I introduced myself as the man who'd asked about the forged label, and his shoulders went up around his ears. I told Miss Devereux everything, he said. I'm not Miss Devereux, I told him. I don't wear perfume, and I don't have a temper. Yet. He gave me a sidelong look, hesitated, then muttered, There was an extra package last week. Special delivery, cash paid. Miss Devereux handled it herself. I wasn't supposed to ask questions. Who picked it up? A driver. Tall, dark hair, grey streaks. Same one who comes for Chef Mazzone sometimes. So the loop was closing. Aromates, Mazzone, Devereux, and the trust, all tied together by one neat corpse and a missing item small enough to fit inside that tin. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had abandoned the Times and was engaged in his favorite sport, sitting motionless while the universe arranged itself to prove him right. I gave him the report. He nodded once. Miss Devereux handled a private transaction, cash only. The same courier who serves Mazzone retrieved it. Lally is found with an empty aromates tin and a matchbook from Mazzone's restaurant. We can now assert sequence. He closed his eyes for a moment. Lally intercepted the package meant for delivery to Mazzone. When he realized what it was, he sought to profit. That was his last act of initiative. Meaning the tin held whatever he stole. Yes, and whoever wanted it back arranged for its return in the most ostentatious manner possible, by sending Lally, empty and expendable, to my kitchen. Nice touch, I said. A body for a message. Not merely a message, Wolfe said. A provocation. It was meant to draw attention away from the original theft and toward scandal. It implicates Allardyce, embarrasses me, and shields the true object. I leaned against the desk. And what do you think was in the tin? Saffron, ostensibly, he said, but more likely something hidden among it. A jewel, perhaps, or a document. Something small enough to be carried in a spice tin, but valuable enough to invite betrayal. The saffron was camouflage, the medium of transport. He rang for Fritz and ordered coffee, which is Wolfe's equivalent of raising the battle flag. Archie, summon Saul. Have him trace the driver who makes deliveries for aromates. We shall have the courier before dusk. And call Miss Allardyce. Tell her the body in my kitchen is about to speak. He spent the next hour in silence, thinking. When Saul arrived, Wolfe briefed him in that slow, deliberate cadence that makes facts sound like chess moves. Saul nodded once, pocketed the tin for fingerprint comparison, and left. Evening fell with its usual lack of ceremony. At 8:30, the phone rang. I answered, and Saul's voice came through, calm but edged. Got your driver. Name's Carlo Moretti. Used to work kitchens with Mazzone years back. Left under a cloud. Rumors of theft. Guess who's been paying his rent lately? Devereux, I said. Bingo. And guess who he met last night around midnight? Let me guess again. Mrs. Enderley, Saul said. In front of the trust building. I got pictures. I hung up, went into the office, and gave Wolfe the news. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of satisfaction breaking the surface. Excellent. The conclave ripens. Tomorrow evening, Archie, we will have them all here. Allardyce, Enderley, Mazzone, Devereux, and the driver. I will provide the seating. You will provide the restraint if tempers prove undisciplined. I nodded. What about Kramer? Invite him too, Wolfe said with relish. He will provide the punctuation. That was when I knew the trap was built. The bait had been laid in saffron and deceit, but Wolfe, patient, immovable Wolfe, was ready to serve the main course. Now, generate the final section of the story, ensuring a satisfying resolution. Maintain the logical progression of clues and character arcs, delivering the final reveal smoothly while keeping the ending impactful and true to the detective style.